Hello, Jesse.
Good morning. How are you?
All right. Glad you could make it.
Yeah, I'm a lot better this morning than yesterday morning.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I was woken up by this noise that sounded like, have you ever had like a big dresser or like some cabinet fall over or collapse?
Oh,
And I running around my house like totally not awake, thinking what happened, what fell, was there an animal in the house? And it took me a long time, in part because of the way it was angled outside and because I was like not awake, to realize that this car had just totally destroyed a telephone pole.
Wow.
So my morning was basically in chaos, and very tired chaos at that.
Yeah.
Today's much better than that.
Oh, yeah. Hello, Devansh.
Hello, sir.
How are you? All right. How are things there? Are you straightening things out, or?
Yeah, I did get an offer today, so I do have something for the summer final.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I think it's probably pretty chaotic right now with respect to a lot of things. So. Yeah.
Yeah, most big cities are in lockdown.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Well, hopefully, we can get through it. It's a bit. I mean, I was out a little bit yesterday to run errands, and it was shocking how many people were actually out. We're not supposed to be, they have a lot of things closed, but there's still people running around doing stuff, so I don't know. Anyways, let's see. I don't know how many people we should wait for. Z said he wouldn't be here, so wouldn't be able to make it. Well, why don't we get started? I'll just record the session and people can look at it later. So welcome to the meeting. Is there anything we want to talk about before we get started? Any news or?
I'm sorry. What did you say?
Any news or topics that you wanted to bring up?
I mean, things that I guess I've mentioned to you. We're talking today about I guess I don't want to overlap what's ahead. What's going to be on the agenda today?
Oh, well, okay. So the agenda, I just wanted to recap the Twitter conference, and we'll talk about some papers, and then we'll talk about the CSV conf presentation a little bit too.
Okay. I guess my updates are just, as a personal update, I essentially have moved to. I could basically not leave my house for a while because my work has moved to quarantine or just remote work, and as those who don't know, I basically have a day job in sort of IT or web development, and I'm a little concerned because not in my department, but there are a lot of people are being laid off or restricted, and I don't foresee that happening, but that's almost like a tension that hangs over things right now. So that's one thing. But overall, I'm really excited about the Google Summer of Code application, yes, but also a lot of related things tying in that for me. I signed up to do the NeuroMatch conference that I think I found out mostly through you, but actually my other friends mentioned it too. So the NeuroMatch conference will be cool. I might present something there. I don't quite know how that selection or notification is going to be working, but I'm I signed up for that. The New York Women in Computing Conference has been postponed, so I don't know about that. I think CSV is totally online now, right? Is that what
Yeah, it's
happened with
totally
that?
virtual. Yeah.
And uh, other than the paper that I mentioned, kind of on Slack about starting, that's pretty much it. But I mean, I'm kind of surprised people. Not surprised, it's just different because a lot of people are saying, "Oh, I have so much free time. What am I going to do with it?" And for me, it's like I have maximum amount of things to do, and my actual day-to-day life isn't changing except for the fact that it's harder to be outside and do like necessities, and I'm dealing with more people's like emotional distress. So
Yeah.
I maybe it'll slow down, but I'm like super busy right now personally.
Yeah, it
That's quite
is.
okay.
Yeah, it's both like it's free time, but it's overwhelming at the same time. I mean, like people work from home. If you work from home, you already have a rhythm. People who move from like an office to home, it's a little bit disconcerting. So it's always an adjustment. But really, yeah, it is. It does take a lot of time just to you know get through the day, but so yeah, I mean, so the NeuroMatch conference, I wasn't going to bring that up, but I'm glad you reminded me about that. So for Ankit and Devanch's benefit, and for people watching online, there's a conference that is started. Someone started it up because everyone's working from home, and they're on their video conference all the time, and it's called NeuroMatch. And Jesse, can you find the site and put it in the chat if you can? I don't know if you have your web browser available, but it's I guess it's supposed to be like an online conference where it's like an unconference where you get into groups and you present things and you discuss them, and they use Zoom, which is a different video conferencing tool. Zoom has this great feature that Google Meet doesn't have, which is the breakout room. So if you're in a group of more than like 5 or 6 people, you can break them out into separate groups, and you can have side discussions and then bring people back into the main group and discuss further. So I think that's what they're going to utilize a lot in that conference. Um, I submitted an abstract. And then Jesse wants to submit an abstract. The deadline is in a couple days, so that'll be that'll be something to watch out for. Um, and Jesse, do you think you're going to make the deadline on the abstract, or
Yeah, it seems to be. Actually, when is it?
what the deadline for the conference?
The abstract deadline. Because I think
Oh,
I'm like ready to submit it today, but I don't know
I think
when it
it's the
is.
25th. So
Yeah, definitely.
So the abstract deadline is like the 25th. So that's like in 4 days. And then the conference, I think, is the week after this coming week, so like the 30th, 31st time period.
Yeah.
So, and I think if Ankit and Devanch want to join in, it's free to register. So,
Yes. It seems really acceptable.
Yeah, and so it's just a lot of things on neuroscience and other related topics. So I'll send out an email after the meeting about it, maybe include some details. Okay. Let me see if I can find it in my.
This is neuromatch.io.
Yeah, there it is. Let me share my screen here. So it's neuromatch.io. Yeah. And let me share my screen here. Oh, NeuroBatch. That's NeuroMatch. Although you probably find something under NeuroBatch, but it wouldn't be that. Um, so can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. So this is Unconference in Computational Neuroscience. This is my registration form here, but you can click up here to register. They're going to be on Twitter. Registration dates, so 16th through 25th. The 25th is the deadline for the abstracts. The unconference meetings actually are 29th through March through April 10. And I think the unconference is where they match you with people. So there's like an option in the registration that asks you if you want to be matched, and you would just say yes if you want to participate in that. Otherwise, this online conference part would be the thing to attend. And then this is at this time NeuroMatch is inviting submissions for short talks and contributed talks. Please send your title and abstract less than 200 words to neuromatchconf@gmail by March 25th. So they welcome student and postdoc contributions. So this is like less than 200 words, so it shouldn't be that hard to put something together, although sometimes it's challenging to get your ideas into that small of a space. And then you get your spot, and then you have to prepare some slides. So their goals here are to simplify conferences, reduce meeting and travel costs, and obviously if you're stuck at home you can't travel. But a longer term goal that I've seen in recent years are people trying to solve this problem, which is reducing carbon emissions and the cost of travel. So, there was a A-Life conference 2 years ago that did this sort of thing where they were in England. The conference was in England, but they had virtual participants. And the idea was to make it less, more sustainable for people to attend. And then finding new ideas or collaborators. So hopefully you find some people that you might want to collaborate with or who like your ideas.
I think that's what the collective intelligence conference is doing too. Like I don't know if they're doing virtual options specifically, but like half the conference is going to be virtual by nature, like Boston, like Copenhagen, right?
Yeah. And and they may do a virtual version too, because I don't know when it's like in May or June. So
yeah, exactly.
we'll see. But speaking of finding collaborators, I wanted to go over the Twitter conference talk here.
Oh, yeah.
So this happened yesterday, and it was at my time. It was 9:45 in the morning. So I think Jesse's time was 10:45, and in India it was in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
But so this was our OHBMX. So what they did was they had this talk. It went over 24 hours, and it was all hosted on Twitter. So you had this account here tweeting out these banners. So we were number 44. So there were like at least 60 to 70 talks from around the world, and ours was number 44, and we were in the connectivity, developmental modeling, and tools groups. So they have hashtags for each group, and so that was our sort of focus area. And so what they did was they sent right before the talk, they sent my Twitter account this message, and that was the headline for the talk. And everyone following that account would see it come up. And then I would just click on this button here, which is the response, and I started creating a Twitter thread here. So this is my account here, and I have been virtually meeting since 2004, so I know a little bit about the process here of virtual meeting. And then they wanted us to number the tweets and to put this hashtag here, which is great. And then the text goes in here. So we're pretty much up against the 240 character limit on each of these tweets. So I had to change a couple things just to make sure that they fit in a little bit better. So number one is neuroethology is the study of brains and behavior. Well, we've read through this before. I put in these images. I grabbed them off of Wikimedia just to show what the Brainberg vehicles are. Uh, this is Stefan's figure, Rajan Brain. Then this is Z's figure. Actually, 8 more replies. This is Z's figure, number 4. This is Ankit's figure, number 5. And if you just click on the figure, it'll bring up the whole figure and someone can download it if they're interested. So I know it handles the figures a little bit funny in this thread, but you just click on the image. And so then finally we have interest in learning more, and then we have this link to the paper. And so thank you. I added that, number 7. And then we got someone here, Roberto Toro, who actually works on cortical folding. And so he gave a talk on cortical folding in another session. And he said, lovely talk. I'd love to try some Brainberg vehicles with folding brains and developing connectivities. And so he, I don't know, I guess these are the links to some of the things here that he pointed back out to me. So that's just an idea that actually I've talked to another collaborator, Aiden Rock, who I've been, chatting with for about a year on various topics. And we actually talked about this, modeling cortical folding and things like that. So Roberto also said with another collaborator, Kayuzo Haribe, we were also talking about approaches to add function to our brain folding models. So what they're doing is they're modeling the neocortex, and the neocortex expands like a sheet. It expands, as a series of layers. It's like a layered sheet that expands outward, and it's very self-similar. So it just keeps replicating itself outward, and you grow this huge sheet. And in some mammals, it's usually expanded in mammals. In some mammals, you see this smooth sheet covering up the midbrain and the pallium and areas like that. But as the sheet expands, it starts to run into the constraint of the skull. And so what happens is it starts to fold up. And in humans, it's expanded quite a bit. If you look at in the order primates, you have a lot of cortical expansion. And the more cortical expansion you get, typically the more wrinkled, or what they call convoluted, the neocortex is. So if you see this little picture of the brain here that he's got in his profile picture, there are a lot of wavy lines. Those are all convolutions. And so the neocortex is convoluted in these organisms with very large neocortex. But they're modeling how it folds, and they actually suggest that it's under the control of gene expression. So the folding happens sort of as a spatial constraint, but it also happens as a consequence of gene expression that allow it to take on that, to grow that much. And then they have done a lot more interesting work. So if you go to Roberto Toro, if you look him up on like Google Scholar or something, you'll see some of his publications. We'll probably talk about it in a future meeting because it's pretty interesting work. But I think some of you have expressed interest in neocortex, and that's something that you might want to check out. So I'll probably talk about that in a later meeting. Next thing I want to talk about here is I'll go over these papers that I've selected for this week. Like I said, I go through my reading queue and I pull up about 3 papers. So we'll move on to that next. I think I have another image in here. Oh, that's just from the Twitter conference, so we don't need to talk about that. So the first paper this week is interesting mix of like movement behavior in humans and vision. There we go. It'll allow me to do it. How vision governs the collective behavior of dense cycling pelotons. And so a cycling peloton is just a bike rider, someone who rides a bike in a bike race like the Tour de France. This is, it's a biomechanics paper. Um, but it's also collective behavior. So, in densely packed groups demonstrating collective behavior, such as bird flocks, fish schools, or packs of bicycle racers, so they make that connection to fish schools and bird flocks. Information propagates over a network with individuals sensing and reacting to stimuli. So, remember when we talked about the Boyds many months back, and how the Boyds have this, like they have a bunch of individuals in this collective social structure, and they have these cues that they use to organize themselves. So they might use visual cues, or they might use like distance cues, or they might have like a sense of touch, and they have these set of rules that they might use, like heuristics, like don't get too close to your neighbor, don't get too far away from your neighbor. And so if they employ those heuristics, if you do this in a computer program, amongst a bunch of agents, you'll find that they produce these emergent collective behaviors. And so in the Boyd's example, it's flocking. So the Boyds can flock, form different formations, and avoid obstacles in a coordinated manner. So that's sort of the idea that they're getting at here, but they're using bike racers as an example of this system. And so in this case, they're looking at bike riders, and bike riders, of course, have a sense of their surroundings, but it's largely visual. Their visual sensory system governs local interactions and sets the network structure. So that means that they're all monitoring each other, but they're using these heuristics to figure out how to arrange themselves with respect to their competitors. And I guess in bike riding, that's an important thing to do because you have to, you can't get too close because you'll collide. You don't want to get too far ahead of the pack because you'll get exhausted, and so forth. They found that cyclists align in patterns within a plus or minus 30-degree arc, corresponding to the human near peripheral visual field. So they want to keep their competitors in their sights. They can't, they don't want to turn their heads too much, but they can see them out of their peripheral vision. And so that governs the interactions here. Furthermore, the group structure changes near the end of the race, suggesting a narrowing of the used field of vision. So when you pay attention or when you focus on a task, your field of vision doesn't decrease. I mean, you can still technically, you still have the same field of vision, but your attentional resources focus more on things. And so, I don't know if any of you have heard of attention blindness, but that's like what happens when you focus your attention on a task is that you're blind to other things. So, you might have things happening in your peripheral vision that you aren't aware of simply because you're focusing on this one task. So our results show how vision modulated by arousal dependent neurological effects sets the local arrangement of cyclists, the mechanisms of interaction, and the implicit communication across the group. And they also describe information propagation phenomena with an analogous elastic solid mechanics model. So they actually use a soft materials model to model these interactions and how the behavior of the collective operates. So yeah, that's something we haven't talked about. I don't know if we talked about it in the collective behavior lecture, but a lot of people are using soft materials like gelatins and other types of things, gels and other types of soft materials to model self-organized collective behavior. That's kind of interesting. Some of the things people have come up with sort of as analogies for this. So here's a picture of a cycling peloton. So you've seen bike races where, they sort of arrange themselves. They maybe leave the starting line and they have to position themselves for the rest of the race. And, they're all kind of in a pack here where they're trying not to collide, but they're also trying to get in a good position. So one of the reasons they do this, of course, is to gain strategic position, but also they want to reduce their aerodynamic drag. And you can see they wear these helmets that allow them to do that, but also to sort of, prevent drag from the oncoming air, because you're going about, 30 miles an hour, and there is some resistance to the air. And so this is, it's a I think kind of a fascinating paper. They talk a lot about the system and how people behave, different strategies that they use, and what else? They talk about wave propagation, which is something that, if you look at a collective model or a collective structure, it does behave like a material, and it does have things like waves that emerge. So, you think about like a bird flock, you have wave propagation. So, you have a bird flock, and it, if the birds start to change direction, the birds at the front start to move in a certain direction, but the birds at the back don't know about that yet. And so the behavior, if you look at it collectively, it behaves like a wave. It starts at the front, and then it moves backwards as the information becomes available to the birds further and further back in the flock. And so you can model this as a wave propagation. And it all has to be coordinated, but it's not coordinated in a top-down way. It's coordinated locally by local interactions. And so what else? Well, this is the vision part. So they talk about the field of visual, sort of the visual envelope of the bike rider. So this is the focal area vision, like when you look straight ahead, or when you focus on a task straight ahead of you. And then this is the peripheral vision area. And so, you can monitor things out here, but it's not easy to do. Sometimes you have to turn your head when you're focusing on a task like this, especially when you're trying to keep your head down and focused on the, forward to not induce drag on your body. You're less likely to look in this area. And so it's a fascinating model for attention, because we don't think about it in a naturalistic way too much. I mean, people, when they talk about attention, it's often a laboratory experiment, but this is something happening in the real world. So it's really interesting to see this. What else? So they do a lot of continuum mechanics here. Just a really neat paper. So I checked that out, and let me provide the link here to the folder. Make sure that people get a chance to follow up on some of this if they want. Okay. Next paper is something Jesse, I think, saw a bit about in the other group. And this is one of my colleagues, Thomas Portages, and he presented on this. So he's using this platform called Morphognostic, and it's a cellular automata that models different types of behavior, and it behaves sort of like, it's not a brain necessarily, but it's an information processing model. In this case, he's looking at honeybees and how they communicate through dance movements. And so he showed some materials on this in the other meeting, but he since that time he's put out this paper on the topic. So this is the write-up of his research on this. and so he's working in his own company here on this topic. He actually works in OpenWorm, and he works on the robotics team, and so he's done a lot of stuff with robotics, and he does this stuff with morphognostic, which is actually, I think the point of doing this in honeybees is to transfer the technology to collective robots. So they've been working on a lot of robot controllers, like software for, like, coordinating different robots, and doing this in a biologically inspired way. And so uh, he takes so honeybees do this thing. They do a lot of social behaviors. One of the things they do is they do this waggle dance, which is where if they go out in the environment and they explore for like food resources, and one of the bees finds a food resource, they'll do this waggle dance. It's where they shake their body and they uh, basically alert the other bees to a food source. It's like a specific dance that they do. Other bees know what it is, and they know what the significance is, and they can coordinate their search for resources effectively. And so, but this is a collective social behavior. So you can simulate this behavior in a cellular automata using the morphognosis model. So I don't know if you've seen anything about. I know that Devansh and Ankit haven't seen anything on morphognosis, but I can point you to the lecture that we had in the other group, just to give you some background on it. But it's a special type of cellular automata which has this function where there's spatial nesting. So, cellular automata are these little cells that are arrayed in maybe a two-dimensional array, and each cell interacts with its neighboring cells. And so the state of the cell in question is dependent on its neighbors. So if a majority of its neighbors are a certain state, that cell will become a certain state. In morphognosis, it's a little bit different. There's this nested structure. So like there's local information, which is the single cell and its immediate neighbors. And then there's more general information. And so there are these nested neighborhoods where you have neighborhoods of nearest neighbors, neighborhoods of local neighbors, which might be 2 or 3 cells out. And then it goes out to very coarse-grained information about the entire array. And so doing it this way is a bit more informative in terms of, mapping local to global information and so forth. So he uses this model to model the behavior of waggle dances and things like that. So he talks about honeybees being the focus and inspiration for a number of simulation initiatives, and he kind of goes through those. Actually, there's quite a rich literature on that. And so people have simulated different social behaviors in bees. Let's see. Okay, a number of years ago, I explained to a coworker how my dissertation program, and a number of years ago means like 30-some years ago, a model of instrumental operant conditioning could learn various tasks through reinforcement. So he was doing some early reinforcement learning research. He then asked me how smart I was. I put him off, not having a ready answer. He persisted, so I blurted out that it was as smart as a cockroach, which it is not. To which he replied, "Don't we have enough real cockroaches? Fast forward to this project. Don't we have enough real honeybees?" Well, come to think of it, maybe we don't. The point of this story is that the question, why should anyone work on an artificial animal intelligence, is, at least on the surface, a reasonable one. And given our unique intellectual accomplishments. So he's arguing that focusing on human AI isn't enough. We can learn a lot from social insects and other forms of AGI, which is, of course, a very general term that people like to throw around. And so let's see if we get into the actual details of his experiments here. So morphognosis means the shape of knowledge. So Actually, I didn't mention that the Morphognosis, and there's another platform called yeah, the other one I can't remember the name of it right now, but Morphognosis works by having a cellular automata, and then it actually feeds that information into an artificial neural network. So it's actually a hybrid model that uses an artificial neural network to classify the outputs of the cellular automata. And so he actually worked on nest building behavior in pufferfish. So he has another paper on that topic. And he's able to, in that one, he also uses morphognosis, and he's using sort of this, so it's a spatial model of morphogenesis, but there's a temporal component as well. And so that's what he's trying to use, a sort of the spatiotemporal, he's trying to build a spatiotemporal model of the process using cellular automata and then an artificial neural network to classify things. So, let's see. Okay. So he gives a lot of technical details, and then he gives an example of the nested neighborhoods for the cellular automata. And he shows the world that he uses. So this is the world where you have the honeybees and they explore different cells, and it's analyzing the things that are going on in this array. So I don't want to get too deeply into the paper, but okay, so this is the example here where you have a bunch of bee behavior that's simulated. It's generating behavior on this grid. And then it identifies metamorphs, or these regions that are of interest. And they could be small local neighborhoods, they could be, regional neighborhoods. And then the metamorphs are analyzed to produce some output behavior of the model. And so he goes through a lot of more technical details here. So I recommend checking this out if you're interested in this area. He gives a lot of the details to implement it. It's a pretty good paper. I don't know if where he's going to publish it eventually, but he does make a link here between metamorphs and deep reinforcement learning. So there's actually this reinforcement learning aspect that is potentially interesting as well. Let me see if I can find this paper citation in here. Here it is. Okay, so and I'm on this paper too. I don't know why I couldn't remember it, but it's Morphozoic, which is so morphognostic is the shape of knowledge, and he's using this morphognostic model to model like behavior. But there's another platform that he developed called Morphozoic, which is sort of specialized for morphogenesis, and so it's a little bit different in the way it's structured. But if you're interested in either of these platforms, he did a Morphozoic tutorial in the open house several years ago, as well as the lecture that he gave a couple weeks ago in the other group. So if you're interested in this topic, there's a lot there, and the software is open source. So if you're interested, maybe we can put something together and try to start doing some experiments with it. So the last one I'll cover briefly, and then we'll move on to our other business here, is the cybernetic systems of belief. And this is something that it's an older paper from 2000, but I ran across it and I thought that Jesse might be interested in this particularly. The cybernetics of systems of belief. So this paper is about, in cybernetics you have this discussion about energy and information, and he calls them two ontological domains. And in this case, though, they're adding a third domain, they're proposing to add a third domain to cybernetics, which are observer valued imparities. And so a link is suggested between Stewart's proposals and the constructivist epistemologies of second-order cybernetics, which impose on the observer the obligation to take responsibility for the worlds that he or she constructs. So this is, in cybernetics, this is this idea of the observer, which is, there's second-order there's, the cybernetics that you find like amongst people like Viner and Beer and people like that. And then there's this next wave of cybernetics that involved like the observer, which is, the observer of the system has an effect on the system, or the way they construct the system has an effect on the system. So that's what he's referring to here. And it's an older paper, so it's interesting though that he's kind of brought these two things together in a pretty effective way.
Mm-hmm.
So the constructivist epistemology of second-order cybernetics impose on the observer the obligation to take responsibility for the worlds he or she constructs. This includes decisions about beliefs and purposes. The observer is also invited to address the question of what is the ontological status of such beliefs and purposes. In other words, if you build a model and it has certain biases or beliefs or, assumptions, this is suggesting that it's constructed by the person creating the model, and that we have to sort of account for that when we analyze the model and when we're aware of the model. And it's actually very reminiscent of a lot of the stuff that people are trying to do now with AI ethics. Well, Jesse knows more about this than I probably do. But, people talk a lot about, being aware of biases in AI and things like that. So this is kind of a throwback to 2000 where they're kind of talking about a similar thing. So it's not a new issue. It's just, what was that?
I was going to ask, does he get into anything specifically about embodied cognition? Because it sounds like a lot of like the philosophical components of incorporating, embodiment into like cybernetic stuff.
Yeah. Well, he talks about constructivism. So constructivism is like has its roots in embodiment. I don't know if he talks about too much, but so constructivism is where they talk about how things are constructed in the world, and you're an observer and you make things in the world. And when you make sense of things, you impose a model upon nature, and that model is, of course, then fluid. But there's that embodied principle there where you're, doing, your cognition is interacting with the world, and there's that connection. I don't know if he talks about embodied cognition specifically in this paper, but they talk a lot about, like, they make this link. If you go to there's a literature on constructivism and cybernetics that is out there. It's in just this paper, but people talk about this a lot, these sorts of topics. So that might be a place to look for ideas in that direction. So this has roots in like this has a lot of roots in like past in the past half century of development or more now of like cybernetics and autopoiesis, which is Maturana and Varela. And autopoiesis is actually an old idea that has the similar concepts of creating a system and then having an observer and how the system's constructed and all that. So it's all kind of, this is, I think, a good like root to those ideas. Like, how do they come out of this first order cybernetics? So yeah, they have some figures in here, a nice little model, a system of beliefs. So, and then there's some good references in here. So that would probably be of interest to Jesse. And again, it's in that folder I shared with you. the sharing should be on. So if you need to get access, let me know. So I just wanted to point this paper out. What was that?
I checked that I could get access to it this time, so I'm good.
Okay, good.
I already got it.
Yeah.
Checked it.
So I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware once again that the archive submission finally went live. So it was like 3 weeks or so of waiting, but it's out on archive. And it's in the quantitative biology, neurons, and cognition category. Maybe sometimes they put it on hold because they don't know what category to put it in. And so the moderators are doing a lot of stuff with the COVID-19 submissions. And so, it's hard. I don't know if there are any in this area, but yeah, it probably took a while for them to figure out where exactly to put it, but yeah, that's where we're hosted. So let me put the link in the chat. And they
on a kind of related note.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, what was that?
Oh, just that I almost feel like I should make a compiled list, but if anybody, I was kind of I was mentioning how I don't have that much free time right now, but if I did, I would like to. There's a lot of different ways you can contribute to COVID stuff, like through contributing technical skills right now. There's like specifically a software development, like an app thing you're working on. There's also a really large volunteer list. Maybe I'll put that link in the chat for that because I actually mentioned that on Facebook yesterday.
Yeah.
One of my, I like to call him a friend, but more like acquaintance. Johan John is like a great computational neuroscience guy, and he mentioned it. And it's called COVID-19 Pandemic Scientist Volunteer Forum. And like it's mostly designed towards biology people, so we have to put it in the open forum deal. But also they are looking for like biogrammatic skills, which sort of we have, I guess, here anyway. But there's that, and there's also like Kaggle has a COVID-19 like data science project. If you're more inclined for a data science thing, there's stuff on Kaggle.com. About that. So there's a bunch of ways to do like COVID stuff right now if you want to pitch in for that. So, a plug for that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I do have to mention also that there's been a very good role for like preprints and open science in COVID research. So a lot of there have been a lot of submissions in bioRxiv, and obviously some of them maybe aren't like the greatest science, but there's a lot of them are, and people been doing stuff in real time. Scientists have been trying to nail down things, and so having it open like that, where you have a quick cycle of like you go in, you present a paper, people say it's right or wrong, they test it, see if it works, and then you can reevaluate, submit another version. It's really bootstrapped a lot of the research that's been going on, so it's accelerated research quite a bit in that area, and which is good in a case like this because you're trying to, solve a time-sensitive problem. But that's sort of the goal of open science is to really get things, keep things open and move things forward. So, there's the link Jesse put in the chat if you're interested in the Kaggle. That's interesting. I know Ankit and Devant are interested in machine learning. So Kaggle in general is a very good place to check out for machine learning, but in cases where you have some socially relevant issue, it's always good to maybe try to participate. Again, like not everyone's efforts are going to be successful, but that's the nature of science, I guess. So last thing I want to talk about, and this is for Jesse and I on the submission to CSV Conf, is the epistemological directories slide. So I made some slides up. I don't know if I've shared them properly. Right now I've just kind of made a rough outline here. So I have title slide, which I just took from like I have a bunch of uh, template title slides for things, so I just put one on here. And this is the abstract that we submitted. This is, this isn't going to be in the final thing, but this is sort of a guide to what we said. Then there's some things I just kind of threw in here. This is the origins in Web 1.0, so this is an example of something that they did in Web 1.0, which is this sort of directory where you go to links, you visit links, and there's static text. And then knowledge spaces for a particular topic. This is actually my section, maybe, but you can contribute, or we can contribute to anything as long as we see something interesting we want to add to it. But you have the frontier map section because you are working on that more exclusively, and I'm kind of have this knowledge spaces idea that I threw in there. So I'll take the knowledge spaces area. You can take the frontier maps, but if you see something you want to add in, you can put a note or you can add a slide in, and just we can reorganize it later. But it's just to make sure that we get everything in. We want to put things down, and then we can condense it later. So there's this one where I did this with frontier maps, where I mentioned this book, The Theoretical Minimum, which is from Leonard Susskind and George Hrabowski. So in this book, they take everything you need to know to start doing physics, like basically condense an undergraduate curriculum in physics into this book. And it's about, I have it up on my shelf, it's about 150 pages. And it just basically goes through the very, the most relevant details to doing physics. And so I bring that up because that's kind of an idea of like, if you go to a certain field, and physics is a huge discipline, but you have this theoretical minimum concept, which is what's the least I need to know to get up and running. And so, I mean, that's like just, I think at this conference, they're interested in broad ideas. I don't think they're really interested in like really deep technical details, although we might want to give them some deep technical details in some things. Like if you want to talk about the frontier maps, like, maybe what you envision for the next 5 years, or, what you would like to implement. That's like, I think, good information for this group, because they're interested in like open data, but they're pretty technical, but they're also interested in very broad ideas. So it's always good to have like both of those. And I think that's the way we should approach this.
Okay.
And then at the end, I also mentioned the data reuse initiative. So in another group, this eLife Ambassadors group, I've been working on this initiative. And this is the web link to this initiative. And it's kind of like a lot of open data stuff. And it's sort of a similar thing to this group, where it's a lot of people just kind of like volunteering. We have a document that was sort of like the guiding document for the first year, but we've done a lot of those things. So we're looking to expand, and this is like one area in which we might expand that initiative. I bring that up because people at the talk will be interested in it. So, just to make you aware of that. So when you see that, you don't wonder what it is. Just wanted to let you know what it is. But yeah, I think that's basically the way we'll do the talk. So it's a 30-minute talk. So I don't know how many slides we need. People always say 1 slide per minute, but it depends on what's on the slide. If we have, a slide where, like a sequence of slides that are related, it might be a couple slides per minute. It might be like 1 slide per 2 minutes if it's a figure or something we want to, like a diagram we want to break apart. We'll talk about that in coming weeks, how to structure that. But yeah, so why don't you take a look at that and then think about like where you'd like to add in slides, But so just focus on the frontier maps, like
Hmm.
lay out like your vision for that, and then anywhere else you can see where you can contribute, please do so.
Is there uh this conference is in May, right?
May 13th, yeah.
So when is there a specific like I don't obviously I'm not going to wait until May. We should finish this beforehand. I know I think I asked this previously and I forgot because I don't have it in front of me. Is there a specific like deadline we're aiming for with this, like a draft of the slides due, or when do you see that happening? Like, just to set like some time frames in my mind.
So I think like by the beginning, so our meeting at the first week of April, this meeting, it's on a Saturday. I don't remember the actual date, but it's like April 4th or April 5th. We should aim to have like a good rough outline on this in this slide deck. So this slide deck is kind of outlined now, but I mean it's not really there yet. We need to figure out like how you write an outline for a paper. We need to figure out specifics like subsections, and then we'll try to do that by that first week in April, which is a couple, and we might push it back because we're doing the NeuroMatch stuff as well. But it's basically that idea. And then after that, we'll try to like delve into some of the details with specific slides and debugging a lot of the slides, maybe combining or splitting them apart. So it'll be like an outline. We'll do that first. We'll get that out by early April, and then by May we'll have the details worked out and should have like a 30-minute talk.
Okay.
And we can practice it beforehand. We'll want to practice it once or twice.
Did they say any more details about online stuff? I know they kind of said, "Hey, we're going to go virtual with it," but I don't know if there's anything since the last update.
I think they're still figuring it out. How they're going to do that. But I mean, it shouldn't be too hard. I mean, it's like I said, I've been meeting virtually since 2004, so it used to be a lot harder to do. We used to do these like our lab, and back then we used to do these virtual presentations where we'd get people to teleconference from different universities, and it was a big involved thing. You had to go to a special room in the building, and like there was like a teleconference. It was like on a big screen, and but now it's like you can do it on your laptop pretty easily. Some pretty high quality interactive stuff. So I don't know what they have access to. They'll probably use Zoom or something like that, but we'll see. Okay. Anyone else have anything else to add? We're kind of at the top of the hour. A couple minutes spare.
Yeah. So, am I audible clearly?
You're a little low. Your voice is a little low, but
I don't know what to do. So, I wanted to talk about this GSOC thing. I'm writing the proposal, and I just wanted to know that what's the ultimate goal of the project that we're doing this year.
Okay. Yeah.
We are trying to we're trying to simulate an artificial organism, something like that. So just like last year we had, so this year we are adding something from CGS. So but the goal remains the same, right? To make a very intelligent or artificial organism from some models and then Brettenberg vehicles.
Yeah, so I almost forgot about the GSOC stuff. Thanks for reminding me. So, the vision for the GSOC proposal is that you have, we're building upon what we did in this last year. So we're using Brettenberg vehicles, we're using that kind of paradigm, but we're adding on these contextual geometric structures, or adding this approach. So if you look at the stuff from 2018 GSOC, there were two different approaches taken, and then the basic idea is that you have this representational structure on top of the vehicles. So, like I said, we could approach it from different ways. Again, like we did with the Bradenburg vehicles, you can have a certain model for the vehicle, and then also like have this representational structure. So we've talked about how the Bradenburg vehicles are representation free to some extent, or to a large extent, and so it's just where you're putting data into the vehicle, and then depending on the vehicle type, you're getting a certain type of behavior out. But that's connectivity. It's almost like deep learning, where you're just putting data in and you're getting something out at the end, and it's just the connectivity that's driving it. In this case, it's a little bit different. You have a representational structure on top of that. So, you'll have like the basic topology of, the internal neural network. And however you decide to do that, I mean, I know Ankit has a model for it where he just uses the regular vehicle topologies that have been proposed by Bradenburg. But Stefan used, a model where he generated them using a generative model. And so that's one thing to generate those topologies, but then each node then has a representational structure, where each group of nodes has a representational structure. So in geometric contextual structures, and then maybe I can present on this next week if you want, but it might be a little late, but it's just to give you an idea. It's where you have these structures where you define maybe like terms or words, and you have I think in 2018 we used real data sets for this. So we had like a color space. So a color space has a lot of different colors in it. You have colors that are in opposition to one another, like white and black. You have mixtures of colors like green, which is yellow and blue. You have other types of, so you have oppositions, you have mixtures, and you have other points in that space. And so, a representational structure of that would be almost like a belief system for the robot, or for the nervous system to operate on. So like you'd have a representational structure where you could quantify these oppositional relationships, these combinations. We used intervals. So you might have an interval between white and black, which is 0 and 1, which is actually what you have in a color space, like a RGB space, where you have these values, three value, this triplet where, that's okay, Devansh. You have this three tuple where you represent the color, and there's like a low value and a high value for that three tuple. And then there are intermediate values to that three tuple, but they go in different directions. And so that would be an idea of quantifying that space. And so, but in CGS, we try to, capture, first of all, as like a geometric space. So it might be a square or a triangle, and then build a quantification structure around that. So your numbers, your axes represent different, ranges of numbers from 0 to 1, or from 0 to 255. And then within that space, there's some significance to the different values. So, if you think about how we represent things culturally, like color, we can see a lot of different colors physiologically, and physically there are just a lot more colors than that, because you have different intensities of energy that produce colors and things like that. Our physiological system recognizes a subset of those, and then our cultural system represents a subset of those, or different patches of those. So in some cultures, people see or represent many shades of blue, say. Other cultures, they might recognize that whole range of blue as just a single color. So, that's a kind of thing we're looking at in terms of a representational system. You can take things that are physical, or take things that are physical. There's a physiological limit to those, which is what the Bradenburg vehicle is doing. So it's recognizing a light source or something, and it's recognizing it as a thing to move towards. you could have like a light source. You could have like another sensory modality that the Bradenberg vehicle doesn't recognize, but and then you have within that what the Bradenberg vehicle recognizes would be these sort of almost like belief systems or representations of that space.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're getting at. And I don't know, like in 2018 there were two different ways that it was dealt with, and the kind of the idea there is to get to try a bunch of things and to see which ones work in different problem domains best. That's kind of how I've been approaching this. So like with the Bradenberg vehicles, we had tried generative models, multisensory models, collective models, and those are all three different and embodied models. And so those are 4 different options for future development. And they work differently based on what they're focused on. So I would suggest, in this case, I wouldn't like cast my net really wide, but I would try to focus in on like your specific approach and how you can apply this type of model to that approach. Like say you want to analyze or you want to build a vehicle that does things collectively, but you want to put some sort of belief structure in it. So it might model love, but it might believe certain things about the stimulus over others, or it might represent certain parts of the stimulus space more than others. And so you can, that's that second layer of sort of that layer of representation that we're trying to get.
Exactly. So I'll get back to you on this later on Slack because I had some more questions, but we don't have time now. So
okay.
Yeah,
probably the Slack questions are better, but
and this the deadline for submission is 31st, so
yes.
I should be able to do it by like 25th. Then we have about a week of time to review. So
all right, Jesse, thanks for meeting. Yeah, we'll just do a third. You can send it to me early, or I would submit it a couple days early if you can, because the portal gets busy towards the deadline.
Exactly. Yeah. So like I'm already free because the college has shut down. So I'm just working on that only, and yes, this going to Harvard thing is almost cancelled. Almost means absolutely cancelled because the number of cases that US has got. So I got a mail from Harvard saying ki, like the professor expressed his disappointment and all. Then I have just this thing for the summer and feel like I should be like the idea is to build upon the existing platform and the ideas that I had. And just like you said, adding other layers of representations. So I've thought about certain things looking at the CGS paper. So we'll get to you in more details about before 25.
Okay, that sounds good.
Thanks.
Okay, guys, thanks for meeting. Talk to you next week.